Welcome to another Azure Centric weekly news podcast. It's New Year's, or for us, it's really literally New Year. We are recording, as you know, before we launch these on the channels, either YouTube and the podcast channels, SoundCloud, Spotify, Google, and Apple. And I apologize for starting with the lamest plug. Uh, but we like to start this podcast a little bit different all the time, so not to be like mechanical the same way. So
Well, that's true. We're fully unscripted around
completely,
here. That's for sure.
absolutely, as you probably already understand that. So welcome to another episode. This episode is going to be a little bit different from the others, but and the reason why is we are on holidays, as you know, and it's not only us. Apparently, all the other Azure, or the majority of that, is on holidays. We still have some updates because Azure doesn't stop even on holidays, but we have only a handful, less than a handful of updates, and we decided to do something that I think and someone give an idea that is really cool. That is a kind of retrospective of what we think the evolution of Azure from 2020 and what we saw on the field that is different. But let me start to the podcast as usual to thank you because we are humble, me and Andrew, to just with the spread of the podcast, and we want to thank you in this case because you are one of the responsible for that. We are building this and we are recording and we're doing all of this content for you. So we do appreciate that you like us in this case. If you don't like, just leave a comment below or just give thumbs down. We are trying always to please everyone. I know that is really difficult, but we are doing this from our heart. So it's literally from us, from our blood to you in this case. So we do appreciate if you subscribe, if you like, comment, give tips of what you want to see, and everything else. I know that the channel has been growing. I've been receiving from different ways some feedback, and Andrew apparently is receiving as well. So that's good. We like to engage with the community. And Andrew, this is related to the last week of December podcast, but it's the first podcast of 2021. So happy New Year, my friend. I foresee a great year for Azure and for us, and I hope that we can surpass all the bad things that happened on 2020. Right?
I think we're in good position now, in no small part to all of the effort from the Microsoft development teams.
Yeah.
So I think, 2020 had, of course, lots of unique challenges and all kinds of, what do we say, interesting things happening.
Yes.
Right? But, one of the cool things, and, I've talked about this a couple of times, and I know you have as well. We've talked about it before, but Azure and 365 and the whole Microsoft landscape has really shown how fully scalable they are.
Yeah.
One of the things I thought was really cool was, they didn't really blink. Everybody all of a sudden, 9 months ago now said, hey, the whole world has to work from home. And of course, every business, every school, every government office, every doctor's office, dentist, everything worldwide said, oh boy, now we have to support everybody remotely. We were kind of ready for it, but only 5 of our 6,000 employees actually had remote access fully. So it was one of those things.
It
and
is.
Microsoft said, hey, you know what? We've got your back. We've got you. And man, did they ever. There was a lot of rapid development, rapid deployment, things they had, further back in their development pipeline that they pushed ahead. So a lot of people behind the scenes that, we don't think of when we think of, we think a lot of thanking frontline workers and, everybody keeping everything sanitized and clean. That's not a small job in our modern world now. But when I think about it, I think about all of the people that have pushed all these things through and kept them stable. That's the trick as an administrator behind the scenes, right? Yeah. If we don't know you exist, then you're doing a really good job. So a big kudos, going out to all the behind the scenes, Azure 365, and of course, other private companies, admins and developers that have kept everything running seamlessly. Yeah. Well done. Very easy. We don't even know you exist, so you're doing a great job.
Exactly. And I want to extend, I know this is the Azure Centric channel and the Azure Centric that we talk about, Azure mainly centric, right? But it's more, I see this as a more a cloud, although we almost do 100% of Azure here. But I want to extrapolate this a little bit more before we starting to go on the updates. Is yes, this pandemic changed the world or changed the landscape or change not the landscape. In certain parts it did change the landscape because we saw that if you review the beginning of the year, like the first trimester, something like that, we saw that with shutdowns of the factories worldwide, the planet got cleaner, and that was very cool to see, right? Although we had the frontliners that are the healthcare workers that I have a tremendous respect from what they are doing because they were really the front line. But all of this pandemic, and probably I'm a little bit egocentric, if you want to call it this way, because we are IT, but give an IT or give to IT industry a totally different of set of eyes that they didn't have before. And that's not only on Azure, it's other players. I will call it, for example, Zoom. They have a massive grow on Zoom. All the things I was talking to my wife this morning, for example, just to see that how the world changed. So we had the massive problem with toilet paper that we never thought that we had at the beginning of the year, and then was toilet paper. It was, for example, the towel paper there as well. And then if you want to buy, we decided to buy something to entertain our kids. That was a trampoline, out of stock. You could not find anything. And now it's consoles, it's video cards, and it's all of those things that they are directly related to ourselves, but they expose us on a different way. Because all of these way that you're doing the work, right? It's changing. Working remotely, yeah. We were lucky enough to have so much work because there were companies, like you said, that they had before, or they had on their roadmap that they were doing some kind of I can say some kind of road mapping of let's build our remote position, but they have their offices and they have everything. With all of this pandemic, everyone needs to work remotely, and instead of completely stop, that I think was really good. They push hard on IT. So I had months that I was working from home, but I barely can see my family because I was deep on my dungeon here at my office, just working late hours to just have VDI solutions. So all the things that we saw, and that to just go back to what you're talking about, that all of the Azure things, yes, we see this year, and I don't want to be unfair, but we saw this year way more functionalities and way more features and one more updates and grow either on Office 365 And in this case, especially on Teams, I have to take my hat off to the Teams team. I know this sounds a little bit redundant, but it is what it is. It's the Teams team to develop, to make it what it is. Teams right now, it's way more successful. It's way more stable with a lot of new features that I was not even thinking about it, like having the part, and we see a lot of adoption, like seeing the NBA, for example, that is, I think, is one of the most successful, let's call it COVID sports adaptation, if that is an award that we can give. I think I can give to NBA, because the way that they build that interaction with the public, and that is based by Teams. So you say, wow, look at what they did. They stopped like every single one for a few months, but look what they did. Soccer didn't have that. NFL didn't have that. The NHL, they didn't have that. It was only NBA from the major North American sports that they have that. Because soccer, it's going to be very difficult to have exactly the same way. They build that on an arena with all of those screens, all of those people going there, and that is based on Teams. Just to see the evolution that we saw specific on Teams, it's tremendous, and happens with Azure as well. We saw a lot of services, especially on the WVD side of it. And the way that they manage VMs, and the way they manage all the workloads, and the way they facilitate the migration, and they open basically the everything to just facilitate your migration or your cloud adoption, let's call it this way, to specific in this case to Azure. I know that AWS did the same, but in this case on Azure, that's what we're focused right now. I see a lot of those things happening, and that's the part that I'm truly blessed to be. Not as important as the in this pandemic as the healthcare, but I think IT grow tremendously on respect and on the need of today's world.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more with that final statement, because the healthcare workers are really leading the charge. They're defending, but they're also now with the vaccines on the offensive, trying to crush it down and make it more manageable. But IT is really powering everything behind the scenes for healthcare as well, and that's what I'm kind of singing the praises of, is our behind the scenes folks. Definitely, there's so many. I can't even begin to list, because and believe me, I did try the other day to make a list. And I keep every time I walk away, I make a coffee, I come back, I think of another 5 different kind of careers that should be added to the list. So we'd be here for a week just trying to rhyme off every career path that is actually supporting all this. So there's a lot of people there, and you're right. The innovation that's been out, and I did read a statement maybe about 2 or 3 months ago that there's been 3 years of innovation in the last 8 to 9 months, specifically in the Teams space. But I think that it's pretty darn close to that in all of the other spaces as well. There's a lot of new features, new different subsystems going on in Azure, but also better support of the existing ones, right? Yeah. So one of the things that stands out for me, I do a lot of work around identity in Azure Active Directory and hybrids, and there's been so many innovations within that space, really kind of bringing things together and making it more manageable. I think they say, I don't like the phrase, and I know you're not a big fan, but the single pane of glass. Yeah. And it is getting better. I think they've rephrased it now. I think it's called the single management plane. That's what they call it. It's the same thing. Whoever's coming up with these statements, just stop it. But the single area, the single blade to go into for Azure AD is really becoming much more of just a destination for the identity and the security teams. And yeah, I have a lot to say about that stuff in that space, but maybe I should take a deep breath for a minute. Did you want to cover the news, or do we want
I think our
Azure path?
No, I totally. We, as usual, we deviate. We say we have to be on these realms, but we can't. It's beyond our strength, and this is a totally different introduction of the podcast. But it's good. I think it's good because we did cover that. So let's go back on track, and let's jump to the first one. And the first one is those previews ones again, and we're starting the year saying that again. This is a preview, means that you are not supposed to do this in production. But let's start the new year. In this case, with this message, but public preview on support for Azure Container Registry across availability zones. In my opinion, this is something that we really need it because availability zones. I did create some content that's going to be released after this podcast regarding the difference of availability zones, availability sets, in this case for VMs, that applies on containers as well. And the availability zone, the availability sets, for example, it's the old way that you have high availability, right? So the difference between availability sets and availability zones is availability sets, you are saying, specific in this case for VMs, that it's going to be almost the same over here, that you are saying that you have not deploying the same VM on the same rack. Okay, so they call it fault domains. Not they call it, Azure calls fault domains, but they are nothing more than racks, and that's the part that we need to understand. So what we are saying is, or at least the same host, because we cannot, when we create VMs or when we create containers, we cannot say that you are on a different host. We don't have that power. That is the abstraction layer that Azure gave to us. So that's managed by Microsoft. We are not managing where we are deploying this. So we might, if we don't set some high availability, some configuration, we might land our VMs or containers either on the same host, on the same rack, and that can be dangerous because there are some unplanned, or there are some reboots that needs to happen that might influentiate those, right?
Absolutely. There's always those little operational hiccups, right? So sometimes,
and it's not only hiccups; it's maintenance as well, because
absolutely.
there are maintenance.
Well,
they need to
failures, right?
Yeah, they need to reboot it, and we need to understand that part of it, because it's completely different what we were doing. Let me just adjust something here, because apparently something went wrong on my, we should be live, but it's not live, but it's close to live. That's okay. Yeah.
Or your dev test environment, of course. Yep. So one of the other things is zone redundancy can't be disabled in the region that you want to utilize this, and because it is, of course, using zone redundancies as one of the underlying technologies. One of the other things that ACR Tasks doesn't yet support availability zones. So just be aware of that if you were going to be targeting that. And one of the things I was disappointed about, but we can't have everything out of the gate and when it's in preview, is Azure CLI support hasn't been kind of partnered with this for the preview release. Yeah. Now, that said, it came out the week of Christmas and New Year's, so I guess we can be maybe a bit softer than usual on this.
And that's a very good because we can do the second lame in this case plug to just watch the next episode or the next after, just to see if we're going to talk about this when they update, right? But again,
I'm sure it'll be within a couple of weeks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What I was saying is availability zones is a new way that you can do this. You can do the availability because you are not set on the rack that is on one zone specifically. Now it is within the region, so means that you are way more protected from those tolerance. So when even you deploy this, you are deploying to across multiple zones. So means multiple data centers, all blind to multiple racks with different everything, different power source, different whatever it is, right? And that's the part that I like about this coming to containers, because again, like you said, this is one of the biggest things that we're starting to see grow is the use of containers, Kubernetes, and all of that moving forward, right? And I think
exactly.
I think that is really, really good. Really good.
Yeah, and one of the other things I did like about this preview release was it's available in Azure Resource Manager, right? So you can create a template and edit your JSON and create this and deploy it. So though you can't necessarily deploy the specific feature CLI right now, you can actually integrate it into a pre-existing template or a new template, and then push it out through ARM. And that's actually very helpful because then now you can kind of see how it's going to work with your existing automation solutions.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's really good. And, just to kind of think about a little bit deeper about zone redundancy, it is actually a really critical thing because we don't want to have, I used to rate my applications. So my business applications would have kind of a low, medium, high, or critical category assigned with them. And that dictated things like recoverability, DR planning, all those things, how frequent backups are. So when you have a high or a critical, it means that you have to start adding redundancies. And that means using things like availability sets, scale sets, zone availability, even region,
Absolutely.
Right? So we want to assign things to different regions whenever it's appropriate. So without getting down kind of the whole architecture and design road, which will certainly take us down a very long, winding sidetrack here. But I just think that, it is really critical. So if you have a high or a critical business application or system, then, just kind of give it a bit of consideration and put into your dev test environment a bit of a sample.
Absolutely.
And see how it works.
Exactly.
And just try it out. That's what these preview ones are for, because it helps Microsoft too.
It
right?
is.
So they take our feedback and our logs. That's kind of the trade-off, right? So we get these cool new free features within the preview scope. And quite often it's either a very low cost or no cost when it's preview. And we're also helping Microsoft to kind of iron out any bugs before it goes to general availability release. So it is actually important. And if we have some extra time, in the coming weeks still, while things are spinning back up in the real world after holidays. And I think of my world as outside the real world because I run in parallel a little bit. So we're here recording our Azure Centric podcast together, but everybody else is sipping a cup of hot cocoa.
Oh yeah, true. And yeah, it's completely like that. And the part that I like about all of this is and because I work on a multi-cloud environment, in this case I have to say one thing, that the message that, for example, AWS pass on is the message that I impregnate in all. I was doing that before starting even working with AWS. That is, and you have exactly the same. And I think we passed this to you when we were working is plan for failures. Okay, so plan for the worst and hope for the best. And this is the message that I like in this case on AWS. When we're doing this is you need to plan your solutions to fail. Doesn't matter if it's on AWS or on Azure. Both clouds, they have that mindset when they are building their solutions to provide to the customers like me and you to work with. But the message that they are passing,
right.
It's a little bit different. Now Microsoft is starting to do that and to just say that that's why they build like we mentioned on the previous podcast, in this case on the last week podcast, that the well architecture framework and the cloud adoption framework, because they are planning for disaster, and all of this is like the misconception of having a service that is on Azure, it's available. It's a wrong misconception. We still need to prevent that. We still need to not prevent that. Let me rephrase. We still need to plan for failures, even if it's on Azure. And I think that is the most important part.
And I think that this is often overlooked by different organizations for whatever the reason. And I read a post on social media actually a couple days ago. And I didn't talk to you about this one yet, so sorry.
That's okay.
but I read this post. It was an admin talking about, we have an Azure tenant and we have on premises and everything's hybrid, but we have very complex relationships. They had ExpressRoute in play, and they didn't provide any Visio drawings or diagrams to kind of illustrate how they had things laid out. But he did describe, I assume it was a he, they described that they had very complex firewall requirements, and it was a lot of custom applications and data moving. Some had to stay on-prem, but some could be cloud stored. This is actually quite common, right? Like people think that they have this unique situation, but they really don't. This is actually very common. Yes. And when I replied to this person online, they came back and they said, oh, well, no, because I need to set up DR to another region for Azure. Do I have to set up my firewalling to allow DR to happen? And I kind of had to take a step back because I was like, well, duh, of course you do. But once I kind of got over myself, not everybody thinks of that, right? So when you get this big list, and there is a Microsoft Docs article, and I've talked about it a couple times in different podcasts and articles, but you need to use the Microsoft URLs and IPs in your firewall for allowed communication. That will give you cross-region compatibility from your on-prem to Microsoft in different regions. Why is that important? Well, it's just exactly what this person was asking in their question online about recoverability and failover for DR. So it'll allow that failover to happen to, if you're in Canada East and you want to fail to US West too. I mean, it doesn't matter where you're failing to, it just matters it's a different region. It's a different region, different data center. You have to have communication open between those different paths for it to work. Otherwise, the firewall does its job and says, no way. The other side of that is if you don't have those things allowed and Microsoft 365, you're on a very important call with your boss or your boss's boss on Teams, all of a sudden, Microsoft has an issue. They'll just fail your service, like your call will switch live to a different region. So you could move from Canada East to Canada Central, for example. And if you don't have Canada Central allowed for the correct firewall rules and you're blocking inbound and outbound rules, well, your call is going to drop and you're going to have lots of trouble. Yeah. So all these Microsoft services are very well supported for disaster recovery and failover in a live sense. We may have a little hiccup. We might lose a connection and have to re-log in or something like that. but the service will recover very, very quickly. So Microsoft puts a lot of planning. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough. A lot of planning and resources on availability.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we just have to follow the best practices for configuration. So go out, use Bing, search up. I always chuckle, but yeah, use the Microsoft technology. It works well. As you know, I have a saying: Microsoft plays well with Microsoft. So if you follow the docs, you follow the guidance, you won't go wrong. You'll be very happy with the performance. You really will. We're not getting a commission here. I want to say
absolutely. We are not going any royalties. I wish, because then I will probably be on different situation. We'll probably be shooting these on Hawaii or Bahamas or something like that, right? No, we are in Calgary. And I love Calgary, by the way. I'm not saying anything wrong. I love the snow outside.
Well, but there's been a lot of, so I mean, off Azure topic, but this is very timely. There's been a lot of controversy about, right now we have health orders that say here in Alberta, don't travel, stay at home, only talk to, I think it's 2 friends you're allowed to actually talk to and have a coffee, but you still have to stay 6 feet apart. So you and I haven't been able to shake hands and hang out for a long time.
And have our beer, because we are beer lovers.
We really are.
That's the part because drinking alone is depressing. But let's move on. We are already digressed from this. Let's move to the next one.
I just wanted to say that I think all these services have really helped bridge the gap. And if it wasn't for being able to chat with you a lot online and through technologies like Skype and Teams, I don't know. I guess I'd just be drunk by myself.
Possibility. There is a huge possibility. Another good news is the Azure automation. And we're starting to see this. This is the part that I love about this podcast. Is if you follow us, and if you don't, if you are just reaching for the first time, please subscribe the channel and give a thumbs up or give any kind of feedback. Thumbs up is preferable, as you can imagine. Comments, anything that you want to interact with us. But if you already, this is, I don't know, I think it's the 11th podcast episode of this podcast, the weekly series.
Might be.
And I don't know how many already that we are seeing the Azure automation growing region by region.
Yeah, it's like every 2 weeks we see another region being added. Something's, being extended, more features. So now,
Germany West Central. Yeah.
Germany West Central is now added as a region, and now we can do a little bit more automation with the orchestration layer, I think we call that, right? So we can use either Microsoft tools, but also third-party hybrid cloud tools and environments are all kind of welcomed underneath Azure Automation. Much like Azure Arc, Azure Automation allows kind of the bridging between the hybrid and then, of course, managing that hybrid, all those assets, I guess we would call them, in between, right? So I always think of IoT and kind of adding everything together, and really the orchestration is what ties the management of everything together, right? Yes. Am I thinking of this one correctly, or do I need another coffee?
No, you are literally thinking about. I'm just just going here on my notes to see. Yeah, so Azure automation has been on the last 4 to 5 podcasts. So 4 to 5 weeks constantly Azure automation has been on updating, and it's not because they are on holidays. And that's the part that I see this growing, and that's the part that I was saying that I do love doing this podcast, because we see this grow. It's like you have a baby, and now it's not a baby anymore. This is a huge, ginormous giant, right? That is still growing and growing and growing, and is starting to spread now is Germany West Central. It just blows my mind, that part, like you said, and that's the part that I love about this on these weekly news. So moving on to the next one, that is a public preview, is Azure NetApp Files Application Consistent Snapshot Tool, or the AzAcSnap. It's announcing on the public preview in this case. This is more a command line tool, okay?
It is.
To simplify your data protection on specifically SAP HANA in Linux environments, for example, either SUSE or Red Hat Enterprise. And that's really cool, just to see that a lot of those big names like SAP, that is one of the platforms is Azure, and even the SAP Cloud is based on Azure. They are using all of these enterprise level file systems like NetApp that they need to kind of grow from the on-prem to still going to the cloud. And this is a very good way that NetApp did it, to extend their solutions from on-prem to the cloud with Azure NetApp Files. Exactly. I did use a few times, and it's a great solution, by the way.
It really is. So I'm a bit of an old school SQL guy, and one of the things that really spoke to me in this commandlet was the ability to clone storage volumes. So when I think about SAP HANA and all the cross-platform management, truly, I really loved that, because what I used to do was I would clone volumes in SQL, and then you can apply different models, different changes, and you can do your testing. So you have a full kind of really a snapshot of what is essentially a live system. Yeah. And then you can see how your changes and your testing impact that data or the performance of a database, for example. So I feel there's a lot of value in this, and it's still in preview. Yeah. I get that one, but I think that this one has a lot of promise. This is really big. So there's some other command line tools out there in PowerShell that I'm very fond of, as you know, and I think command line management of all these things allows, of course, us for automation.
And this is a good thing regarding what is NetApp, because if you are familiar with NetApp, and if you are a storage an expert, you usually work with a lot of command line. So you are usually familiar with all of this, and this is the way that you can extend that. That's why Azure NetApp File has been widely on enterprise level adopted, because they extend that to Azure. And now with these new commandlets, like you said, it's really difficult to have all of that on Azure. And now with these AzAcSnap, you can do the basic stuff that you can do it with the command line on-prem. For example, the cloning, like you said, the cloning of storage volumes, the data protection, the application consistent data protection, the database catalog management, the ad hoc volume protection, and the support for disaster recovery. Now you can do this with the command line that is still in preview again. So use it, abuse it, but remember that this is in preview. And we always like to do here is a little bit more. Is about give the feedback to Microsoft to help grow, because if we work together, we make this, when coming general available to every single one, a great tool. And that's, I think it's our responsibility as a professionals to work with this, to work with Microsoft. I've been working on that since those beta times long time ago. I remember on Windows Vista, for example, that I even got a plate
Language,
Sorry,
Marcos.
I know that yeah, but it was I was working at that time in Brazil, and I remember that at Microsoft I tried to make it Vista better, and I remember that I was in Brazil. I did catalog, like I was the seventh of in Brazil to cut a lot of bugs that they did on development because of that involvement of the community. And that was the first try, because before that, if you remember, Microsoft didn't open to the community those early ones.
Yeah.
That's why you add, in this case, on XP, the Service Pack 1, Service Pack 2, Service Pack 3, and they had this old mentality, oh, let's wait for Service Pack 1 to be released and then we can start to adopting the product. With Windows Vista, that was a not very successful one. It's when they starting to change the mindset. And they did take some time for them to manage the mindset. That's the part that I like about these previews. That's why I'm standing a little bit about this, because it's like you said. You mentioned every time talking about preview, give feedback. Give feedback to everyone, even if it's you don't like it. Say it why you don't like it, because it can make totally sense. We got feedback on our podcast that they saying that one of us was bigger than the other, so it was like something like that. And I say, and I did analyze it, say, okay, makes sense. It's a good feedback, and it's not like I'm more important than Andrew or Andrew is more beautiful than me. It's not. We are not on that competition. But it's like this is an equal opportunity for both of us. We are growing together on this podcast, and help.
Yeah, it's a cool thing.
It is
So I like it as an opportunity to just kind of sit and chat.
completely.
And, I think if anybody in the big wide world listening is kind of worked with us before, you'll know I'm really not a whole lot of a social guy. So, going on camera and online is kind of outside my comfort zone in a traditional sense. But it is kind of the newer, new world way, I guess you could
Yeah.
say. So, we're adapting, right? And that's one of the things is, as we adapt and we grow and we learn new skills and we get better at it. And, just like our little podcast here on Azure Centric, we listen to all the feedback, but so does Microsoft
Completely.
on, even a bigger, way big
Yeah.
scale, right? So there's community managers and things like that at Microsoft that their job is to really live inside the scope of the feedback from the community and work with them. So if you have something that really, grinds your gears about Windows Vista, or in this case, the AzAcSnap commandlet, then provide that feedback through the preview process. And somebody actually does read it. They listen,
Yes.
100% listen, and you can affect change through your feedback. So if something you find out like, wow, this really doesn't work in my setup, it really just was very bad. So two things. One, Microsoft absolutely listens and will work with you to help correct those things. I think in many cases, I'm not going to make a promise that I have nothing to do with, but I am going to say they really do read. The second thing I should point out is this is a preview feature, and if it does really mess something up in your environment, that is why we stress so heavily about using dev test or just not production.
Exactly.
Right? So we have to remember that, because they can't test for everything, right? So it's like, I know it's a bone of contention, and they changed the quality control methodology in, I think, 2019. But I know with Windows Update, they really do test quite a bit. But, you just can't test for every scenario
Absolutely.
worldwide. There's no way. The trick is responsiveness, getting security patches, updates, new features, and patches behind the scenes for these features deployed as quickly as possible. And that, my friend, is part of the evolution of 2020, right?
Absolutely.
So we've seen this rapid deployment kind of model, I guess, really put to the test, very stress tested, sorry, for 2020. And I think that's where we started talking in our introduction today, was, excuse me, sorry, about all of the different things that have been applied through this rapid deployment model. And there's just so many. I guess I should say, maybe for our listeners as well, we have kind of hit the end of our news. We had a limited number of items because of holidays and everybody's, spending time with their loved ones at home and all of those things, and thinking about, what am I saying? I'm trying to think of the grass skirts and the flower lays, and maybe a pina colada, perhaps. Wintertime in Canada here, folks. So we're trying to think of warm things here. Sorry. That said, the rapid deployment model has really been a huge benefit. And I did want to circle back to when I was talking about Azure Active Directory. So there's been this big push this year, I saw, to kind of tie in a lot of identity and security management features, and really bring them into the Azure AD Blade in the Azure portal, but also to integrate those features together and just make identity more manageable. So it's become more granular, especially on the guest account side of things. So we can now, in the last year, they've made, I think, maybe 5 or 6 major improvements, so that we can do different granular things. One of my favorites was the MFA forced for guest account authentication. So if we send it out to, bobjones@gmail.com to come into our tenant to do something, we can force Bob Jones at that email address to do an email-based key authentication, right? Like one of those OTCs, the one-time codes. And it's a small step, but it validates that somebody actually has access to that account, right? And it's every time we add a little incremental step of improvement, it's the sum of the parts, right?
It is.
So if we add one little thing, and it's just like these Azure features that we talk about every week, and we get to see. So, we were talking about the Azure automation, and it's interesting to watch it grow over time. So you were saying 4 or 5 episodes in a row now we've had Azure automation announcements. It's really cool to watch these features grow and kind of spread out across the different regions and get more things added to them as they go. It's really cool from our perspective. So, it's very, very much a gift that we get to kind of review all those things.
Absolutely.
Right?
And this year, especially 2020, not this year, the last year, right? 2020, we see a tremendous growth on the infrastructure level, right? With the more on the features, or more on the stabilization of the platform. Okay, at least on my point of view, if I permit to do a recap of 2020, and let's spend a few minutes on that. I think it's a good segue to end this podcast, to do a kind of a recap of 2020. I see a lot of things that they were kind of missing on the infrastructure to consolidate their growth, and because I foresee this as the base level, as the foundation for what's going to happen on 2021. Those deeds were really necessary, like the part of making more reliable, like this Azure, for example, Azure availability zones, the way that you can do it, all of that, doing disaster recovery, like you mentioned, because of firewall rules inside of the same zone. You don't need to other zone or other region. Now you can do it, for example, on the same region. And that, I think, is crucial when they announced that, for example, on Ignite a few months back, I think it's crucial for all of those things because now that Azure and the cloud is being heavily used, switching from region to region, it will always go because it will always follow the latency. And there are, because of all of the remote access that we need to do it, everyone work remotely, and depending on the geographic location of the company that we are talking about and their employees, right? You switching from region, if anything happens, it might implicate on their productivity. And I see that as if we can resume in 30 seconds, something like that, the 2020, I see on Azure part of it, these biggest announcements or these biggest evolution and updates on the infrastructure side. And the reason why is I foresee probably that we will still see those, but on 2021, now that we have a very good foundation on the infrastructure, they will more focus on the part that they want to still grow, that is more on application side of it. They, of course, that they will still grow, for example, all the things that they need to do, but they already have a very solid base that is the infrastructure side of it. And I was really pleased to see that because it was really a push this year with all of this pandemic, like we covered at the beginning of the podcast, on the infrastructure side of it with migration. I had customers that they need to deploy in 1200, for example, VDIs. Instead of a 6 months project, it was crashing 4 weeks. And that is the part that we need the infrastructure to be in place. The applications, yes, as well, but we I don't know if you saw that we stopped seeing a lot of the re-architecting of the application for a period of time, like let's say the first semester, 3/4 of the year. I don't want to be too much or too exaggerated, but at least the first semester, we're starting to see a lot of those all of those infrastructure changes, like using the adoption of WVD, the adoption of VDI, the adoption of try to replace what is the workspace that they were working into this remote desktop or remote workspace that they were working on. And that's not only on Azure, in the entire entire IT industry. At the end of this, I started to see a change that, okay, everyone already accomplished that, so now let's starting to enhance a little bit more what we have, or try to mitigate what is the rush that we need, because I see a lot of customers just saying, you know what, we want the basic, we want just the user to be able to work. We will address that later on and try to completely change the roadmap. So it was a lot of change for our industry, and I'm in certain way, and I apologize if you guys don't get me this or you get it wrong what I'm saying, but I'm really happy in of course in a good way that this pandemic did come, because it did change our vision, it did change our way to work, it did change our way to relationship with other persons. Like, I know that, for example, you are not much of a hugger person or a physical contact person, but man, that's the part that I miss the most. We speak a lot of times over the phone, like you mentioned, and Skype and everything else, but being in contact, shaking your hand, giving a tap on your shoulder, having a beer, having those kind of things that we had last year that we were not allowed to do this year, it's the part that I miss the most.
So I'm going to speak to two things that you've said. One, I want to just emphasize, I don't think that you're glad the pandemic hit. I think what you're
Yes,
saying is we're pulling a silver lining
completely.
from this. So we're looking at the positive
Yeah,
things that have come out of this. In life, you and I talk lots offline about different challenges, and it's interesting, right? Because you don't always see the different challenges that people go through, their little daily battles that they have,
absolutely.
the struggles, their home life, finances, physical barriers, all these different things that everybody, and I mean everybody, has these in their own private life. And it's just that, it's private. But, they bring them with them online. They bring them into the office when they come into the office, and you can see it, right? So you could see me and say, Andrew, you look kind of frustrated today. Let's go grab a coffee. And you know what? That's perfect. I just need to kind of break away from this and reset my brain a bit. Let's talk about flowers and trees or something, and let's reset.
Usually
And
it's
then
not
come
what we
back.
talk about. It's either going outside, beers, and a little bit of
Oh, I
outside
know,
of
I know.
technology. We don't talk about flowers.
But
Come
this is
on.
true. This is true. Well, we do talk about different hiking technologies as well, because even though we love to go hiking, and as you know, I'm a big backcountry lover. I love going out very deep in the bush, but it's all about what technology makes that a little easier. Shave 2 ounces off of the weight of a sleeping bag. How do you do that? Is it still warm enough? All these things, right? All this technology that comes into play, even with outdoor activities for, I guess, us nerds, is kind of what we tend to talk about. But like you were saying, it's the tap on the back. And you're right, I'm
Absolutely.
not much of a hugger, but I do relish the very odd hug here and there. And I miss that because as awesome as Skype and Teams and all these technologies are, can't quite do the whole ET thing and reach out and touch someone,
Yeah.
right? So it just doesn't work that way. That's not how things,
No.
well, not today, anyways, I guess. But I think that as 2021 is now here, I guess, really, what we have to do is find ways to close the rest of these little gaps, right? So, maybe it means that we have a few more months or 6 months or something of still some different physical restrictions. We have to give everybody time to get the vaccine, make sure it works. And I'm kind of waiting to see and make sure it works the way that we think it's going to
Yeah.
work.
That's what I hope so.
I don't know. I'll keep my personal opinions quiet.
That's okay. So we reach our end of our podcast. It was a little bit different from the other ones. So we will resume our normal podcast next week. But we like to just expand. We didn't have too much to update regarding Azure, but I think it was a very nice conversation this week about a lot of topics. Not much on updates, but a lot of how Azure evolved during the last year. In this case, on 2020, our personal mine and Andrew's opinion of the field of Azure involved and how we see this going. And again, once again, just subscribe to the channel, help us out. If you like this kind of content, giving a thumbs up. If you don't like, give thumbs down. But give some kind of feedback so we know to know and to know that you are there. We're starting to see a
Absolutely.
lot
Azure
of
Centric's on Twitter. Send a message, send a
yeah.
DM. Marcos will field all the comments.
Yeah, exactly.
All of a sudden, you're going to get like 3.
That's okay. No worries about that. We are still going on this. This is, as you see, starting to be our kind of relief of our end of the week kind of way to just ending the week and starting a new week. And see you on the next episode. And by the way, Happy New Year, guys. Happy New Year, Andrew.
Happy New Year, everybody, and thanks again for enjoying and listening to our podcast.